Hey everybody, what's happening? Brent Axe here from syracuse.com, and we are live here as we transition from Wednesday into very early Thursday morning, and we transition into what is likely a NCAA tournament without the Syracuse basketball orange. It's going to be a very anxious wait until Selection Sunday for the Syracuse University men's basketball team and its fan base as the Orange lose to North Carolina technically last night because it's Thursday morning as we speak. The final at the ACC Tournament in Brooklyn, North Carolina 78, Syracuse 59. So we are here live, and if you are up with us and live and checking out this here on the Syracuse Orange Basketball Facebook page here on Facebook via syracuse.com, really appreciate that. If you're watching live, that's great. If you're watching on the replay later, we do put this up on YouTube and archive it in my recap on syracuse.com. Would appreciate if you shared that as well so people can see the replay if they weren't here. And if you are joining us here, would appreciate a like and a share as we're doing this live. Let people know all the night owls that are up here after that loss. So really, there's two things. There is the game, which we can discuss, which was dominated by North Carolina. There was a stretch there in the second half where the Tar Heels went about 6.5 minutes without scoring, and Syracuse made it interesting. They actually got to within 66-57, looking like they were going to make a little bit of a run there, but this game certainly dominated by North Carolina for the most part. So there's the game itself, and then there is the tournament. Then there is the postseason fate of the Syracuse basketball orange. You guys do your thing in the comments. I'll hop in and respond to a lot of what you're saying here momentarily, but there's a few things from this game that really stand out. One is, again, North Carolina is just lightning quick on their offensive possessions, the way they move the ball, how quickly they go up the floor and score, which is something that Syracuse kept pace with the first time around at the Carrier Dome back on February 21st, because Syracuse's big three of O'Shea Brissett, Frank Howard, and Tyus Battle all scored in that game. Well, 1 out of 3 scored in this game. Now, Tyus ended up with 15 points, but he had to scrap to get there, shooting 4 of 21 on the night. Frank Howard had a pretty much an awful game. There's just no other way to put it. He had 12 points in this game. Let's see what he ended up with on the turnover rate. His turnover ratio heading into halftime was looking pretty bad. He ended up with 7 turnovers on the night, so North Carolina really capitalized on points off turnovers. They really capitalized on second chance points. Howard really struggled tonight to get to 12 points. He was 4 of 18. So 2 of your best players, 2 of your big 3 that you absolutely needed, all 3 of the big 3 tonight against North Carolina, combined to go 8 of 39. That's not going to get the job done against a really good Tar Heels team that can just score at will. O'Shea Brissett was the only thing that really kept Syracuse from being completely blown out of the water. I mean, they lost 78-59. Believe it or not, it could have been a lot worse if O'Shea Brissett wasn't hitting his threes. He was 5 of 7 from three-point range overall, and O'Shea leads Syracuse with 20 points. 4 out of the 5 starters for North Carolina ended up in double figures tonight. 20 of 25 passes for the Tar Heels were assisted in this game. Pinson, who tore up Syracuse the first time around with 23 points, he has 16 tonight. Luke May, great in the middle with 13. Johnson with 17. Cam Johnson, the Pitt transfer, coming through. Williams with 17. So North Carolina did the North Carolina thing. Syracuse didn't do their Syracuse thing. They couldn't shoot after a night last night against Wake Forest where Merrick Dolezaj comes out of nowhere and gets 20 points. He has just 6 points tonight. He started off the game with a great play underneath. First play of the game, you're like, oh, well, here we go again, right? Didn't really contribute much on the offensive end after that. Both Pascal Chukwu and Barama Sidibe fouled out of this game. Pascal fouled out very early in the second half. Barama came in, and you got to give him credit for the effort that he put forth. 10 rebounds in a short period of time on that gimpy knee of his with the knee tendonitis. You could just see him laboring through every time he's got to get off his feet and jump and make a play. But just couldn't put enough in on the offensive end. And, Syracuse just got outworked, out-hustled. You saw a Syracuse team tonight that was gassed. You saw a Syracuse team that could not keep pace with North Carolina. You saw a Syracuse team that was overwhelmed by North Carolina. I see some comments here, and you're not far off to say this. I think the officiating really was questionable in this game. Do I think it's a reason Syracuse lost? Absolutely not, because they turned the ball over, and you can't have Frank Howard and Tyus Battle combined to go 8 of 39 in this game. That's why you lost, and about 4 or 5 other things I can think of here. But it was interesting how North Carolina, a very physical team inside, hand-checking, doing a lot of things, got to the free throw line, I think, 13 times before Syracuse even saw a trip to the free throw line in this game. So it's a footnote. It's something that we have to, mention. Is it a reason that Syracuse lost this game? Are people going to say, those ACC refs are out to get Syracuse and boys up north in the Mason-Dixon line? You make us have this tournament here in New York City, and we're going to put our Southern teams in. I mean, if you want to believe that stuff, I'm a fan of a great conspiracy theory. That's not why they lost this game. That's not why they lost this game. So what Syracuse lost not only is this game, but they lost a chance to control their own destiny. Because had Syracuse won this game, I think they were in. I think the committee would look at it and say that's 4 quadrant 1 wins, that's 2 top 25 wins. Your resume would be good enough for, at the very least, the play-in game. Their resume may still be good enough for the play-in game, given that this Syracuse is the consummate team that is they're good enough in some ways to be in the tournament, but you question whether or not in other ways they deserve to be there. So isn't that what the play-in game's for? Give them one more shot and see if they can get in. But one way or the other, it's going to be a very long wait. It's going to be a long 4 days. All day Thursday, all day Friday, all day Saturday, and most of the day Sunday till the selection show is on at 6 o'clock on Sunday. Remember, it's on TBS this year, not CBS. They put it on cable for the first time this year, and I don't think Syracuse is going to get in. I just don't think there's enough. I think there's some at-large bids that can be stolen. Notre Dame is making a run now in this tournament, and they kind of have a real favorable stance from some of the analysts out there because Bonzie Colson's back healthy and Matt Farrell's back healthy. And that goes both ways, by the way. That goes both ways. Like, you have to give credit to how Notre Dame is playing well again with the injuries, but what about the wins they got without Colson and Farrell? They're a really interesting case study for the selection committee, but you see Notre Dame's comeback before the Syracuse game? They're down 21 points to Virginia Tech with about 15 minutes to go, and they come back and win that game. So there's some bid stealers out there, teams like Notre Dame, some other bubble teams that could push Syracuse aside. What Syracuse failed to do tonight was give the committee a reason to put him in. What Syracuse failed to do tonight was gain a little leverage on the committee. Because that North Carolina game, I think you can kind of walk in that room, theoretically, throw your resume down and say, give me the job. We're in. And that still might be the case. But North Carolina would have been assurance that you would have been in. It would have been insurance in a way that you would have been in. Now you're at the fate of the committee. What you got to hope for if you're a Syracuse fan is that you do judge on a body of work, which, you had to pick up this win tonight to wrap up that body of work, but it's a 4-month process, not, a couple of days at a tournament. Syracuse, 14 of their 20 wins were in quad 3 and quad 4, so that's not going to add up. The one thing that was holding Syracuse back amongst all the other bubble teams was they don't have enough quad 1 combo quadrant 2 wins. They have just 6 in that category. Now, Syracuse has a great strength of schedule. Syracuse has a lot of metrics going its way. Ken Palm rating, BPI, RPI is good. A lot of the measurables that were there. They've got 3 quadrant 1 wins, Louisville, Miami, and Clemson. This would have been a 4th against North Carolina tonight. But what they don't have is just that. North Carolina would have been the wow win. Clemson's a nice win. Clemson's a solid top 25 win. But what Syracuse lacks is kind of that wow win that separates them from the pack on the bubble. So they're not out mathematically. They're not out by virtue of, I see all these measurements and BPI and some of these things. Like last night, there was a 98% chance, according to BPI, which is ESPN's measurement, that Syracuse gets in if they beat Wake Forest. And I'm like, how does BPI measure what 8 people in a room are going to make a decision on? I think that misled people a lot. It was interesting. Did you guys see this before Syracuse started? They were doing kind of the studio show, and Joe Lunardi was on, and Joe Lunardi dodged the question. Kevin Connors is the ESPN anchor. He's a big Syracuse fan, by the way. Didn't go to Syracuse, but a big SU fan. And he asked Joe straight up, okay, so Syracuse has a strength of schedule of 16, and he brought up UCLA as an example. If UCLA with a strength of schedule of 54 ahead of Syracuse, can you explain that? Lenardi says, and I'm not joking when I say this, that one, I'm always wrong about Syracuse, which is true. He's been dead wrong on Syracuse the last 2 years. Last year he had him in and they were out. The year before that he had him out and they made the Final Four. So go figure. The second thing he says is, I've given up making Syracuse predictions for Lent. He totally dodged it, which I guess it's a moot point now because Syracuse is going to be out of most bracketology projections, still in that first 4 out category as a result of this loss. But way to earn your money tonight there, Joey Brackets. All right, so yeah, the game itself, we brought it up. I know that the bracket and where Syracuse stands is mostly on your mind, but we brought up the big points in this game. And the big point in this game was that Tyus and Frank combined to go 8 of 39. You can't do that against North Carolina, a team that, got near their average once again. North Carolina scored 78 points in both games against Syracuse. They're averaging 80 points a game. But, your big three didn't score. You didn't get any help from I shouldn't say any. You didn't get the help you needed from Merrick Dolzaj and from Barama and Pascal overall. Like we mentioned, Barama had 10 rebounds and a couple of good things there. But, when Pascal and Merrick kind of teased you last night with that, gargantuan performance they had, you needed something from those guys. And he just didn't get enough. And, North Carolina is going to just run up the floor and score on you. And we mentioned the ball movement, 20 out of 25 field goals were assisted in this game. So as for the game, I don't think anybody's really that surprised. So now the wait begins on what the postseason will be. What's your reaction if they're in the NIT? I mean, we'll watch, and I'll do the usual thing and, write the recap, and we'll probably be here doing Facebook Live on the live chat and the normal things that we do. But if Syracuse goes to the NIT for a second consecutive year, what's your reaction to that? Is that something that, hey, I'm a fan, I watch every game, or is it something that you can skip and not feel bad about? It's such a letdown, which is why, I've heard some people kind of bandy this about that, well, maybe it'd be better for a young team that didn't deserve to make the tournament to go 4 or 5 games into the NIT versus maybe lose one game in the play-in and out. And that's nonsense. You always take the tournament over the NIT, no matter what the scenario is. You cannot talk me into a scenario that the NIT is better in any way, shape, or form. So we'll see if that's the case. It's looking like that, considering, bracketology and how Syracuse has to kind of wait out some other teams that now control their own fate more because Syracuse didn't grab that at-large bid that was out there tonight with this North Carolina game. So now we just got to wait. That's all we can do. All right, let's see what you guys are saying in the comments here. Michael Antonio says, do you really think that any team in the last 4 seeds could beat Syracuse in a play-in game? I do. I think, Mike Hopkins' Washington team, who did lose tonight to Oregon State, could beat Syracuse. I think that Marquette could beat Syracuse, who's kind of in that range. I think that, just thinking of some of the other bubble teams, I think that Alabama, USC, I don't have it right in front of me, but some of the teams I've seen there, they absolutely could beat Syracuse because they're all in kind of the same category at that point. So I do really think that. To answer your question, now, could Syracuse beat those teams? Yes, because now – if you're playing game level, you're, kind of a middle of the pack, Power 5 team in most cases. And I think Syracuse and it's all matchups, right? The tournament's all matchups. It depends on who you're playing, how much zone defense they've seen, and all those usual questions you ask in postseason play. But to answer your question, yeah, I do think they could. Because while Syracuse has overachieved to this point to get where they are, and frankly, that's a compliment to them, in a lot of ways, I think this has been a great coaching job by Jim Boeheim overall, taking, 6 guys and winning 20-plus games and, getting them at least in the conversation for the tournament. But, it's all matchups in the postseason. But by and large, generally, yeah, I do think they could lose. Let's see. Rob, we were mentally and physically spent, which hurt us a lot on the offensive end, especially as it relates to Howard. UNC played well and got it done. Credit to them for sure. Our fan base needs to be ready to cheer Syracuse on regardless. of where they're playing next week. Let's go orange. Claude says NIT equals not in tournament. That's how I look at it. That's how I look at it. It's a waste of time, in my opinion. Syracuse was a #1 seed in the NIT last year, and they didn't want to be there. And you could tell they didn't want to be there. And that's half the battle with the NIT. You need to be motivated to play in it, and I don't think this team will be, nor do I think they should be. The NIT it's the booby prize. It's, you're playing to be the 69th best team in the country. It's a nice tournament that they have for teams that want to extend the postseason and keep playing a few more games. But in Syracuse, New York, and what the standards are generally, now here's the issue here. This is the 4th straight year that Syracuse is going into Selection Sunday, and we're all thinking, don't know if they're going to make it. Now, one of those years, Syracuse had a self-imposed ban, so we knew they weren't going to play. 2016, they sneak in and go to the Final Four. Last year, they didn't have the resume, and this year, I don't think they have the resume to ensure a bid either. They could surprise us on Sunday and slip Syracuse in a playing game if some things happen that go their way the rest of the week here in Conference Tournament Week, and teams can't lock down what they need to do and take care of business. But, bottom line, 4th straight year on the bubble. So relief is on the way. We've mentioned this a time or two here in the chat about, Jalen Carey and Darius Basley and Buddy Boeheim, all the players that will be back from this year's team next year that will be, bigger, better next season. I think Tyus Battle will be back on this team next year. I think O'Shea Brissett certainly will be back on this team next year, though they're getting some NBA looks. I don't think they're going to be first-round picks, so I think you'll see them back here next year. This is a very deep team next season. There's also a lot of pressure on next year's team because of how this team finished this year and because the depth excuse goes away. This team always could look and say, look, we only got 6 guys, 7 guys. They busted their hump. They played hard. They won up in certain games. They stayed in the conversation right to the end, and that's admirable. But it's different when you have a team that's loaded to the gills, as next year's team is going to be. Edward says Boeheim is players who don't understand the game. They're brought in to be taught. There's a big difference to understanding how the game is played and what is a good move. Williams says poor guard play. What is the point guard job? Why are plays being run near the sideline? When the bigs had their man pinned, didn't give them the ball. Look for the other bigs last night, but not tonight. I think the difference is North Carolina there. Wake Forest just had no inside presence. Not that North Carolina has a ton of big guys. Luke May certainly in there, but they know how to pack the middle. They knew how to keep – did you see how bewildered Tyus, Frank, O'Shea, anybody was to just – it was – I remember me at Clark Griswold. Remember that Clark Griswold movie, European Vacation? He couldn't get left. Look, kids, Big Ben. They couldn't get in the lane because North Carolina is just a better defensive team than Wake Forest is. So I think that's part of it. Tonight, getting some NIT comments here. Amber saying Syracuse is too big to settle for the NIT. Foul Bree says, does Syracuse have to accept? You can decline it. I've seen teams do that, Foul. You can just say, no, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want to go. That's been done. Let's see. Michael Antonio says ESPN drives TV ratings with their drama. Cuse was already in when they beat Clemson, and it was cemented by beating Wake. No. Michael Antonio, there's a website called bracketmatrix.com. I suggest you check that out. What they do is they measure over 100 different bracketology sites, which have no skin in the game, if you will, for drama and ratings. They just, analyze things. And Syracuse is out, according to the Bracket Matrix. They're out according to a lot of bracketologists. One who I talked to today, Andy Bottoms is his name, who writes for InsideTheHall.com, who he's got no skin in the game ratings-wise. And he says they're out. And Jerry Palm from CBS actually had him as one of the first 4 in, and maybe he'll hold that even with this loss tonight. So does ESPN do certain things to drive conversation and get eyeballs and, generate, embrace debate, as they say? Sure they do. But that's not the case with Syracuse. Most experts have them out of the tournament at this point. So, like I said, I enjoy a good conspiracy theory here or there, but it's just not one of them with Syracuse. Let's see. David says, Brent, why is it so blatant that in games like this against UNC and Duke that they can pound on Syracuse, but we get touch fouled to death? I think it's because of, what you have to do in terms of, North Carolina was going inside a lot and Syracuse couldn't get inside. So I don't think you're getting as many foul calls because they're taking a lot of threes. They're taking a lot of shots, a lot of jump shots out, whereas Carolina just kept attacking the basket. So, you keep attacking the basket, and Duke was doing the same thing. Wendell Carter and Marvin Bagley Jr., because Duke couldn't hit water if they fell out of a boat against Syracuse that night. So the more you're going inside, the more whistles that are going to be there. That being said, there's some pretty questionable calls in this game on both sides, by the way. O'Shea Brissett should have had 3 fouls by the time, you made your first beer run to the fridge in this game, and he didn't pick that up. So it did go both ways. Let's see, a couple more comments from you guys here. Nathan thinks Battle's gone, but Mike says Battle will be back. Do you want him back? I certainly want Tyus Battle back. No doubt about it. Tyus Battle comes back. That's a bona fide first-round pick next year. Just think of the natural progression in his game, getting better. I think he's a pro guard at some point, not now. He's not a pro-ready guard as we speak. But do I want Tyus Battle back? Yes. I want Tyus Battle to play with Jalen Carey. And, I know some people were frustrated with Frank Howard at times. I think he was put in a real tough spot this year because there's nobody else behind him. Literally, Geno Thorpe leaves the team. Howard Washington Jr. gets hurt. And we saw bad Frank tonight. We saw the Frank that turns the ball over and forces some shots. And, the guy that's just not the natural point guard comes through. But Frank with another year, Buddy Boeheim to complement the guard depth. He might even have to redshirt next year. Howard Washington Jr., who we mentioned, back and healthy. Do I want Tyus Battle back? Of course I do, is the question. Let's see. Tiffany says it would be a first that an ACC team with 20 wins and the metrics they have to be left out. That's a good point. But that 20 wins isn't what it used to be. 20 wins used to be automatic. If you won 20 games, you were in. That is no longer the case. It's not an accumulation of wins. It's who you beat and where you beat them. And Syracuse had 2 good ACC road wins, Louisville and Miami. Clemson was their big home win. They just missed out on a 4th quadrant 1 win outside of the league with Buffalo, but I don't think Buffalo is a game breaker in terms of, that's what the committee ultimately puts you in on. Syracuse had a losing record in conference play, which is not going to hurt their cause. Wouldn't be the first time a team with a losing record in conference play got in. So, yeah, historically the measurements are there, but 20 wins is not the automatic in the eyes of the committee that it used to be. So just keep that in mind when they get together in that room on Sunday and we're all biting our fingernails waiting to see what happened on that one. Vinny says, admirable, please be realistic. They're a divided team that struggled all season to play like a team. Leadership is gone. I don't agree with that, Vinny, at all. Like, how does this team win 20 games? And beat a Louisville, beat a Miami, beat a Clemson, competitive in almost every game they played, gave North Carolina a run for their money. Duke and the second Virginia game were really the only 2 games Syracuse just, was completely outclassed. How do you make it that far? How do you survive with only 6 or 7 players without leadership? I just don't buy that at all. A team that lets its adversity eat its character and falls apart and isn't even in this conversation for the tournament here on, in mid-March, that's a team without leadership. So I don't agree with that. I mean, you see what you see and that's fine, but to say this team had no leadership at all, you don't get this far without that. Now, could they have been a little more creative on offense? Could they have moved the ball better? Could they have done some basketball things that we can critique? No question about it. But this team had leadership, and this team had heart and guts and a lot of things that are admirable given the circumstances. Given that Torian Thompson left, Geno Thorpe left, Howard Washington got hurt, Barama Sidibe is playing through horrible knees, Pascal's playing through knee tendonitis, Tyus, Frank, and O'Shea have to play 40 minutes a game. And given the circumstances this team went through, you think Merrick Dolezaj and the way that he emerged and helped this team down the stretch more in the Wake Forest game than tonight, you think there's no leadership there? You think these guys don't care about each other and aren't going to war with each other night in and night out? I don't buy that at all. Michael Antonio says, look up Bracketville, the #1 ranked bracketology service. They're good. They're really good. Bracketville's great. They've been one of the more accurate ones out there. I have not seen where Bracketville has Syracuse as of now. I'm curious to see what they have tomorrow after some things settled at the ACC tournament today, but they are very good. No question about it. Mike saying, I think Frank just had to get comfortable and had to learn to be a true point guard. And I think, by the time we got to the end of the season, for the most part, he did. Not to say he wasn't prone to some mistakes, but he's got the ball in his hands every possession. It's like a quarterback that, throws 4 touchdowns but 3 interceptions in a game but gets the job done. I think that was Frank for the most part. You remember the mistakes gnaw at you, but given what he was handed this year, I thought he did a pretty good job for the most part. Not tonight. Frank had a bad game tonight. There's no getting around that, and it hurt Syracuse. And Tyus Battle had a bad game tonight on the offensive end. And when those two aren't scoring and they're not in sync with O'Shea and the big three is not there, you get what you get. You get a Syracuse team that shoots 31% and only scores 59 points. And you can't do that against a team like North Carolina. Austin says, any chance Moyer transfers? I hate to answer those questions, to be honest with you, Austin, because I don't want to be in the mind of a player. But, boy, did he disappear. Came back healthy, thought he was going to have a bigger role. When that UConn game, and I'm going back to December, but he dominated in that UConn game. And I said, okay, this is a player that's going to have a role, particularly because Syracuse didn't have a lot of low post presence. But, boy, he just kind of disappeared down the stretch here. I think there's always that one player that you think is going to seriously consider it. And, by the way, that player last year was Frank Howard. And he almost did transfer and came back, and, Syracuse needed him this year. So will Moyer consider a transfer given the considerable depth that's coming in and what his role is going to be going forward? I think it's safe to assume he'll think about it, but I always hate to put myself in the head of a player and where they're at. How much does he love school? How much does he love it here? How important is basketball to him? But, there's been a high rate of transfers in recent years. B.J. Johnson and Ron Patterson, Caleb Joseph, and a number of players have done that. So it is something to think about, no question about it. And we'll end on this comment here from Roland, who says, if they make the tournament or they don't, they had a good year in my eyes. 20 wins when people thought they'd have a losing record. It was a good season. Season's not over. I believe we will hear their name on Sunday. So we'll end on a positive note there. Roland thinks they're getting in, despite the loss tonight. It is certainly up in the air one way or the other. So I'll tell you what, guys, that's when we're going to meet again. We are going to do a live Facebook here after the selection show, maybe even during the selection show, because what they're going to do is something different this year on the selection show. They're going to tell us who the 68 teams are and then fill out the bracket from there. So we're going to know pretty quick whether Syracuse is in or out. So once the bracket is filled out and we know whether Syracuse is in or out, I will be here, we'll be reacting, and I hope you guys can come back on Sunday night. The selection show is at 6 o'clock, so once we know Syracuse's fate, I'll hop back on here on Facebook Live, and we'll do the thing. Thanks for hanging with us here late on early Thursday morning, late Wednesday night, depending on where you're watching tonight. Appreciate you doing that. I'm going to stay up late into the night here writing a recap for you, so please read that in the morning and all of our great coverage here on syracuse.com, and enjoy the rest of your week as best you can while we anxiously await Selection Sunday. And thanks for hanging with us here on Facebook Live, presented by the Bill Rapp Superstore.